Hey everyone, and welcome back to the channel. In this week's video we are sharing our last video in the North Wales series for now, at the incredibly charismatic Beaumaris Castle. The stronghold sits on the island of Anglesey and is famous as the greatest castle never built. It was the last of the royal castles that were created by Edward I, and perhaps his final masterpiece. It's nothing more than a breathtaking example of medieval ingenuity. From the moment you step through the gatehouse, you're transported back in time. The perfectly symmetrical design, the towering walls, and the still water moat create an air of awe-inspiring power. So why not join us as we visit Beaumaris Castle? From 1285 onwards, Edward poured huge amounts of money into building an iron ring of castles across the coast of North Wales. Beaumaris then is a sister to Edward I's other Welsh fortresses, which include Caernarfon, Conwy and Harlech. It was the last to be built, and in some ways is the pièce de résistance of Edward I's exciting work. The genius behind Beaumaris Castle, and the majority of Edward I's Welsh castles, was the architect Master James of St George. Master James had masterminded the mighty towers of Harlech Castle and the walls of Caernarfon, which wrap around the town and the castle too. Edward I almost certainly chose this site in around 1285, around the same time that he selected the locations in Harlech and Conwy Castle. However, for strategic reasons and sheer financial pressures, he started building those first. As a result, when it came to building Beaumaris in around 1295, Master James had learned a great deal from those neighbouring castles. The style of Beaumaris is best described as a concentric design, or a castle within a castle. It's made up of a phenomenally strong 4.7 metre thick outer curtain wall, which encircles the equally well defended inner castle. In actual fact, Beaumaris is undoubtedly the world's best example of a concentric castle design. It was a method of building which maximised the castle defences. First of all, the outer concentric wall was shorter than the inner, to give archers a vantage point against oncoming enemies. The only route of access into the castle would have been through the drawbridge that we first entered into, then to turn directly right into the Barbican and onto the south gatehouse, which we are now walking through. This design was meant to make the castle almost impregnable. Once through the gates, an attacker would still have to face a further 11 obstacles before entering the heart of the castle. This included the Barbican, further murder holes, 3 portcullises, and several sets of doors. If the daunting prospect of the gate passage proved too much, the would-be attacker caught hesitating between the inner and the outer walls would not have survived for very long. There would have been around 164 arrow slits in the inner wall, designed so that arrows could rain heavy crossfire, which would have poured down from all directions. A huge amount of work was undertaken in the first summer, with an average of 1,800 workmen, 450 stonemasons and 375 quarriers on the site. This consumed around £270 a week in wages, and then the project rapidly fell into arrears, forcing officials to issue leather tokens instead of paying the workforce with normal coinage. The centre of the castle was filled with temporary huts to house the workforce over the winter. The following spring, Master James explained to his employees some of the difficulties and the high costs involved. After this, the construction slowed down during 1296, although debts continued to build up, and work dropped off further the following year, stopping entirely by the 1300s. By when around £11,000 had been spent, the halt was primarily the result of Edward's new wars and focus in Scotland, which had begun to consume his attention and financial resources. But it left the castle only partially complete. The inner walls and the towers were only a fraction of their proper height, and the north and northwest sides lacked outer defences altogether. By 1306, Edward had become concerned about a possible Scottish invasion of North Wales, but the unfinished castle had already fallen into a poor state of repair. Work recommenced on completing the outer defences, first under James's direction, and then, after his death in 1309, Master Nicholas de Darnford. This work had finally halted in 1330, with the castle still not built to its intended height. By the end of the project, around £15,000 had been spent, which was a colossal sum for the period. A royal survey in 1343 suggested that it needed at least another £684 to complete the castle, but this just was never invested. Beaumaris was really a vanity project for Edward I. He was a ruthless king who was fixated upon gaining the control of Wales. Master James had also learned lessons from his work upon coastal Caernarfon. He planned an ingenious system of docks and water gates to allow ships to supply the castle in the case of a siege. You can see this in the present docking gate, which is adjacent to the modern ticket office and where we first entered inside the castle. Ships carrying as much as 15 tons of cargo could unload from there. In addition, Master James devised a deep symmetrical moat, which was designed to be filled by the incoming tides. The level of planning which went into Beaumaris was matched by its phenomenal expense and labour costs. The outer curtain wall contains an almost symmetrical 10 towers, and the inner wall wraps around 6 formidable stone towers, and also the north and the south gatehouses. The moat would have circled around the entire fortress, although it's been partially filled in today. Although the main parts of the castle were built extremely quickly, with work beginning in 1295 and ending in 1330, the towers, gatehouses and defences were never finished, and that's quite apparent as you visit the castle today. If the castle had been fully finished, its modern appearance might have been much grander. The 2 round towers which flank the northern gatehouse are at the tallest in the entire castle, but even these are about 10 metres shorter than they were actually meant to be. They lack battlements and the intended roofing. All of the other towers in the internal ring of the castle are about half the height planned. The original designs crowned them with grand turrets, which would have given the castle a very distinctive skyline. To top it off, the gatehouse at the front of the castle looks formidable, but the original plans would have given it a second story of rooms and fortifications, effectively doubling its height. The northern gatehouse, which stands opposite, was meant to span to the same size too. What you see today is undeniably impressive, but it could have been much stronger still. So why was Beaumaris Castle left unfinished? It was partly due to the death of Edward I in 1307 and of architect Master James of St George in 1309. But it was more than that. Both died on the borders of Scotland, showing that Edward's attentions were then more fixed upon conquering the Scots than controlling the Welsh. Strategically too, Beaumaris was placed outside of the action. From around the 1300s onwards, the majority of Welsh-English skirmishes had ended, and any smaller areas of resistance were centred around Harlech and Conwy. As we make our way through the internal passageways, we visit the beautiful chapel. Within the eastern curtain wall, it's worth a visit alone. A moment experiencing the beauty inside this room mixed with so much peace is quite unexpected, especially within the walls. There are 5 lancet windows, some incredible and exquisite carvings, and a vaulted ceiling. It remembers all of the feel of the medieval mass that would have taken place inside, and this place just truly takes you back in time. The castle suffered no significant siege until around 1403, where the Welsh besieged the castle during the revolt led by Owain Glyndwr against English rule. However, it was retaken by the English only a couple of years later in 1405. Beaumaris Castle was a strategic location during the English Civil War, since it controlled part of the route between Ireland and the King's headquarters in England. The castle was managed on behalf of the King of the Bulkley family. In 1646, parliamentarians defeated royalist armies, and Colonel Richard Bulkley surrendered the castle. Royalists revolted against the parliamentarians once again in 1648, but eventually surrendered a second time in October of that year. The castle was not slighted or damaged, as was the fate of many castles captured by the parliamentarians under Oliver Cromwell. Architectural defences were crucial for survival due to the need of protection against potential royalist invasions from Scotland. When Charles II returned to the throne in 1660, he restored the Bulkley family as constables for Beaumaris Castle. By this time, the castle had already been stripped of its valuable sources, including the lead-based roofs. Therefore, the castle then fell into a state of neglect, eventually becoming dilapidated and overgrown with ivy. In 1925, Richard Williams Bulkley gave the castle to the Commission of Works, which performed restoration work, including removing vegetation, repairing the stonework and excavating the moat. It's perhaps ironic that the most impressive concentric castle in the world never had to prove the value of its own design. It's also somewhat sad that the mighty plans of the castle were never fully realised. Effectively, the castle is a blueprint of what it could have been. Sadly too, Beaumaris was passed over during the 1800s. During this period, writers and painters of the Romantic movement used the decaying remains of the once proud castle as inspiration for their art and poetry. Turner painted the decaying walls of both Conwy and neighbouring Caernarfon. Beaumaris, however, remained perpetually isolated from the main action, alone and ivy-covered, huddling on Anglesey. In the middle of the castle you will see a large lawn inside the inner castle walls. This is the inner bailey or the ward. Today there are no wooden buildings, but back in the 13th and the 14th centuries this would have not have been an empty space. It would have now had some demolished stone buildings and several wooden buildings. During its time in use there would have been stables as well as the hall and chambers outside, which you would find a mixture of small industrial buildings used to support the garrison. The space is very open inside, and much of the living quarters, the prison and the chapel are built into the walls themselves. You can investigate the extensive internal passageways and the countless nooks and crannies without realising the place was never finished. During the summer of 1592, the castle was to be host to a most violent death as a Catholic priest by the name of William Davies. Davies had been attempting to help other priests travel to Spain when he was arrested. He had been questioned and sent to Ludlow at one stage, but all in vain. He remained defiantly Catholic, which under the reign of Elizabeth I was not tolerated. He would eventually be sentenced to a traitor's death by being hung, drawn and quartered. In 1987, William was declared a Catholic martyr by the Pope. As with most of our visits, we read and hear about reportings of strange sightings over the centuries. The castle's most active spot seems to be its chapel, where people have reported the sound of ghostly chanting. Some have even been able to record the chilling melody when it wasn't audible to the naked ear. Also in the chapel, visitors have been known to find themselves standing in an icy cold spot that tends to appear and disappear abruptly. Visitors have also experienced an uneasy feeling of being watched whilst they roam the corridors. Apparitions have been sighted and the footsteps of people from long past have been heard in and around the castle. Some also report an intense feeling of loneliness when they visit the site. The most disturbing activity at the castle is probably the sound of disembodied pained screams that appear to come from no living source. Central to the castle's ghostly tales is the legend of Sir Roger, a knight who, according to lore, met a tragic end within the castle grounds. His spirit, clad in tarnished armour, is often seen wandering the battlements, his gaze forever fixed on the distant horizon. Those who have crossed paths with this restless knight recount a palpable sense of sorrow. The corridors are also known as an uncomfortable place to be in, with a very strong feeling of being watched and followed when passing through them. The castle, with its rich tapestry of history and hauntings, offers a unique blend of education and exhilaration. Whether you're a history buff keen to explore its architectural wonders, or a paranormal enthusiast eager to uncover its ghostly tales, Beaumaris promises an experience that will both enlighten and enthrall. A visit to the castle is a must-do when visiting Anglesey. The town of Beaumaris has its own jail, some lovely ice cream spots, restaurants, a boat tour to see the puffins, and of course, make sure you do a walk along the pier and have a look at the Menai Strait with Snowdonia's Great Mountains in the backdrop. So that's it for this week, and we really hope that you've enjoyed our visit to Beaumaris Castle as much as we have being able to explore it. Please hit that like button, click the notification bell and hit the subscribe button to see more like this. We want to say a big thank you to our channel members and to our Patreons for all of their support. If you do fancy supporting us further, then please have a look in our description box below for more information. So we'll see you in the next one. Till next time.